Hi, I'm Nancy North, Fishers and Farmers Communications and Outreach Lead and your host today. I'm here with co-host Amy Smith, our tech coordinator, and Heidi Coiler, also co-hosting. She is Fishers and Farmers coordinator. Today we are so excited to introduce you all to Rachel Hopkins, Abigail Lambert, Rob Pulliam, and Steve Harrington, who are all part of some really interesting collaborative work that's being led by the farmer-led committee called Shoal Creek Woodlands for Wildlife in Missouri's Merrimack River Basin. Today for the program, we'll start with a short video that will show you their watershed and give you a look at a number of the projects, the types of projects that they're doing. Then we'll feature Rachel and Abigail, Rob, and Steve in a 30-minute interview. And as Amy said, during that time, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll look at those later. We open, after that, we do the 10-minute small group conversations. You'll automatically be moved to a small group of just 2 or 3 people, have a conversation. When we come back, we share short takeaways. And then we open up to a half hour of Q&A in which you can just ask your questions. A really rich time of this program. So the whole program is about an hour and a half. As I said, we'll start with a video. Let's take a look at it to introduce you to Shoal Creek Woodlands for Wildlife.
The Shoal Creek's region of Missouri, with rolling hills, spring-fed streams, and rugged forested terrain, is one of the most biologically intact and functioning landscapes in the Merrimack River Basin. The area includes just over 195,000 acres, with forest and woodlands covering about 85% of the landscape, and grasslands making up the rest, mostly in the creek bottoms. About 2/3 of the land in this region is privately owned, and the rest is in public ownership. In addition to its obvious natural beauty and diversity, this is a working landscape producing timber products, cattle, and hay. And its location, just 70 miles from St. Louis, makes it a popular destination for outdoor activities like floating, hiking, fishing, spelunking, and hunting. The Merrimack River Basin is the large light blue area on this map of Missouri. Within it, the land shown in orange has been identified by the Missouri Department of Conservation as a high priority for protection, called the Mid-Merrimack Conservation Opportunity Area. And the green area represents Hoosaw and Cotaway Creek watersheds, where the Shoal Creek Woodlands for Wildlife farmer-led committee focuses its attention. This group, which had completed 211 projects on just over 900 acres by 2020, started with a simple conversation in 2008. Landowners and conservation staff gathered to talk about erosion, land use, grazing, woodland management, and other water-related issues that concerned them, and then self-organized later to figure out ways to address those issues. Here, a group gathers on the committee's Partner Day in 2019. Today, benefits of the projects completed by Shoal and Hoosaw Creek watershed landowners are obvious to neighbors, and word is out that they've figured out ways to make the work easier and more affordable. Here, Steve Yokom, his daughter and business partner Rachel Hopkins, and her daughter stand at the site of a large stream bank and habitat restoration project on their land. Before work started, the site looked like this, with a high eroded stream bank. The cutaway bank was graded and sloped away from the stream to restore access to the floodplain, stop erosion, and create habitat. Steve Harrington and the Nature Conservancy brought a bioengineering approach to the work, carving out space for large trees to be laid and covered to stabilize the soil and make use of natural material from the farm. Since that work was done and native trees, grasses, and forbs were planted, the bank has held. A range of projects has become important here for stabilizing the landscape and setting farm operations on track to achieve their business and land management goals. In an area where grazing is the focus of most ag operations, fencing to keep cattle out of streams has become an important practice. To make this work, wells are dug, and alternative watering systems are put into place. Rachel says it makes herd management easier in addition to protecting streams. Steve and Rachel work here with fencing near a new well and watering system on their land. Replanting pastures with warm season grasses is expanding seasonal grazing options and adding value in dry months. Reinforced stream crossings are making it easier to move cattle and equipment without disturbing the creek bed. Once done, the simple change reduces erosion and eases routine work for years. With the help of the Ozark Land Trust, the Yokom family purchased 400 acres adjacent to their farm and put an agreement in place to protect it from development. And the Ozark Land Trust will ensure the land is managed according to the agreement forever. Spring Creek, a small stream on the land, looked like this when purchased. Since then, the stream and its immediate drainage have been stabilized and warm season grasses have been planted. A lot of listening and shared projects have not only led to progress, but stronger connections among community members and real friendships. This happened, says Missouri Department of Conservation Fisheries Manager Rob Pulliam, because landowners are making the decisions, designing, implementing, and building these solutions together where they are versus implementing an existing program. And landowners are openly sharing what they're learning and doing to help each other. For conservation practices to work over the long haul, says Pulliam, they have to help people solve real problems. This work, he says, is bigger than all of us, and it takes all of us to get it done.
Okay, I'd like to introduce Rachel Hopkins first. Rachel farms with her father and her business partner, Steve Yokom, in Crawford County, Missouri. She's also an agricultural business specialist with the University of Missouri Extension. The S&R Cattle Farms operation includes more than 1,100 acres with 2 miles of frontage on Ozark Creek, and it's been in the family for more than 100 years. Welcome, Rachel. Rob Pulliam is St. Louis Regional Fisheries Management Biologist for the Missouri Department of Conservation, based in Villa Ridge, Missouri. Welcome, Rob. Abigail Lambert is with us from the Ozark Land Trust. She is River Stewardship Manager for the Land Trust, and she's also based in Villa Ridge. Welcome, Abigail.
Thanks, Nancy.
And Steve Harrington has joined us today from the Nature Conservancy in Missouri. He's Director of Science and Impact Measures for the Nature Conservancy in Missouri. And he had a big hand in that stream bank restoration work that you saw in the video. Welcome, Steve.
Thanks, great to be here.
Before we get started, I'm so eager to start asking questions. This group is full of stories and information and energy. But the question I want to just focus your attention for a minute on one of the big things that this group has done is to self-organize. We often talk about that, and it's harder to do than to say. But as you listen today, think about, what does it mean to be a bottom-up, self-organized group? And what benefits are you hearing them speak about that came from working in that way versus the top-down way we're a little bit more used to? And Rachel, on that, I want to start with you. In our prep call, you mentioned that you and some others who came to the first meeting in 2008 were kind of reluctant. There was a little bit of hesitancy in the beginning about coming together and really talking about the land management issues you had on your mind. Why was that? And how did you work through that? What happened that kept you going?
So you have to really go back and look at history, what happened in the previous 40 to 50 years to see the hesitancy there. Back when, and Rob may even have a better timeline than what I do because this was all before I was born. There was basically, they tried to do a land grab. MDC, I think, was a part of it, and some other organizations. They essentially wanted to take 200 yards on either side of the Merrimack watershed and have everyone move their stuff out of it, essentially turn it into an Ozark Scenic Riverways there. And at the time, landowners came together. There was a huge push, came together, and they were able to fight it off. And ever since then, there was a lot of hesitancy to work with conservation, to work with other organizations because of what had happened previously. The further south you get into the Ozarks, the more distrust there is of government organizations, of different organizations that are not, that are different, that aren't what people are used to. So that was the real hesitancy, is we were afraid of what could happen. I know my grandfather had a lot of reservations. He was very concerned about giving away private property rights and that sort of thing. So that's where a lot of the hesitancy had come from, is from what previously happened 40 some odd years beforehand.
Mm-hmm. So with that in mind, when you, why did you stay involved once you got there?
Dad was very nervous about it, and we dipped our toe in, and we found out we didn't get shocked. And we started dipping our toes in a little bit more, and gradually we waded in, and we realized that even though each organization has their own goal, there is more overlap of the common goals than there is each individual goals. So that's the reason why we ended up staying and becoming so involved with these people and these wonderful organizations and wonderful people, is because there is so much overlap. And if you look at where everyone wants to go, we want to go in the same direction. We just have different ways of how we would get there.
I've heard Rob say many times, more than once, this is not a program. This is people. This is people getting together and looking at things they want to accomplish, figuring out how that might be done, and then moving forward as wisely as possible to make it happen. How did this take shape? And I'd like to hear from all of you on this. How did you actually make that happen? And Rachel, in particular, as a farm owner and a member of the committee, how is that different way of doing things attractive to you? And what does it bring to you that didn't happen otherwise?
So I'll let Rob go into how things kind of formed, because I really wasn't a forefrontal part of that. I came in just a little bit later. So Rob and Abigail, they can really talk about how it formed. But it is just such it's hard to explain what the overall arching theme of it, or for me it is, I've got a lot of things in my mind on how it would go. But it's just it's hard to explain once you actually get into it, for me, of why you want to stay. Why do you want to keep going with it?
So perhaps this is where I can jump in, as Rachel so elegantly put it. A lot of this stuff happened before her, so in an indirect way, I'm kind of the old guy. So to understand how, look at the projects, the number of landowners that we've worked with, the areas impacted, to really appreciate how special this is, there is that history that you have to understand. And I'm going to briefly touch on that history. The history was there was a proposal, the Merrimack Dam, to impound the Merrimack River, and a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers lake. And this was probably planned in the 60s. But with that, eminent domain had been used by the federal government to purchase properties for that reservoir, which was, I think it was estimated at 22,000 acres. And then there was flood easements on top of that. And it went up into the Hoosiaw and Dakota Way and all up the Merrimack. And those properties were bought. What happened, this is like during the Reagan administration, it was decommissioned. Essentially, there was enough public outcry that we don't want this. And that's what decommissioned the dam. So then that land became available for sale again. So there was eminent domain on tens of thousands of acres. So there's a history there that we inherited that was just, quite honestly, it was very distrustful of, if you had government in your name, very distrustful, and understandably so. So that kind of gets into the approach of, if we're going to work with folks in the Ozarks, the hills, the trees, the rivers, we've got to figure out, how do we work together? How do we not develop a program from on top, but how do we understand values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors of the folks that we want to work with? So instead of coming up with a program and a bunch of technical staff figuring out what to do, we took a different approach. We did some homework. We looked at the demographics. We wanted to know about the people, incomes, education, everything we could learn about people, what they use their land for. And eventually we went to a local form of elected government, the Soil and Water Conservation District. We went to them, and that was in about 2010, maybe 11, and said, hey, this is a special area. We know it is. We want to work in this geography. We've done a few things with landowners here, and here's who they are, and here's what we've done. But we'd really like to form a committee of landowners to figure out what to do, what the message is, what practices, what are the issues. And I told them flat out, if we do this on our own, we're going to get some stuff done. We're going to get some stuff right, but I'll guarantee you, we're going to get some stuff wrong, and we might get it really wrong. So would anybody on the Soil and Water Board be willing to serve as a landowner committee member? And that's what we're wanting help with. We need help figuring out who would be good folks that know this area, that work the land. And there's landowner types: commodity production, recreational landowners, absentee landowners that own property, canoe livery operators. That's a big business down there. So we asked that Soil and Water District for help. We got a volunteer, but then we also, at their suggestion, said, we need to do an exploratory group. We need to have a few people to figure out who might be best willing to serve, who has that background. And that's what we did. So it was not Steve, Rachel, Rob going and picking out our friends who we've worked with before. It was help with Soil and Water Board member, another landowner that we've worked with in the past, and another landowner that the board said, boy, if you could get him, he'd be good, because he knows everybody. His family's been there since the railroads came in the 1800s. And it was not. Oh, and University Extension also was on that exploratory board, and he knew everybody. So it was not us asking landowners to join this. It was, who are some of the movers and shakers in the community? And instead of us reaching out to those landowners, we wanted those local people to reach out to other landowners. And they came up with a bunch of names. And what was interesting, it's like, I'd never worked with any of them. And I asked the Soil and Water Tech that at the time, I said, Kevin, do you know any of these people? He said, no, I don't know any of them. Like, good. we're not hitting our existing customer base. So that's essentially how it happened. It took 11 months and 10 meetings, some of them with groups, some of them individual, just to explain what we're after. But it took that amount of time just to even get to the point of forming a landowner committee to have our first really scoping meeting to discuss, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to take this through a facilitated, I'm going to use the word marketing, but that's what it is, a marketing process to identify what are the issues, who are the audiences, what are the messages, what are the products, what are the services, what's the cost share rate, what's the length of the agreement, what grants or money should we apply for. And it wasn't like, here it is. It's like, let's build this from the ground floor. And once we have that plan, a marketing action plan of what we want to do and how we might want to get there, then it was every time pot of money came up, it was not, well, look, we just got you some money. Boom, here you go. No, it was bring it back to the landowner committee, discuss it with them, tell them the good, the bad, the ugly, everything about it that we understand, and then ask them, should we apply or not? Does this fit what you guys want to do? And if it does, we'll go bust our rears to get it done. If this doesn't fit, we're not applying for it. We're not going to do it. So that's kind of that ground floor, coming up with those shared interests, shared direction. I mean, this is kind of a business plan. What's the mission? What's our vision statement? What are the goals? What are the objectives? What are the strategies? What are the tasks? All of that was spelled out. Took us 2 years to do that, but that's what we did. And then we finally came up with a plan. And that's been truly the guiding document of this group of landowners with technical staff. MDC's been there, Missouri Department of Conservation, Abigail, U.S. Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources, and other experts that we bring in when it's appropriate to bring them in. So I've talked long enough, but that's kind of the beginnings, the ground floor of how it started.
Thanks, Rob.
Nancy, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
I know I went off and came back on. So I just to add to what Rachel and Rob have already said, finding that that spot of that overlapping goals. The other really cool thing is that the flexibility of each group to provide whether it's a different practice or we have different flexibility. We can offer something different than MDC can, or we have the flexibility to do something that maybe MDC can't or couldn't. So in one of the first projects that we worked on, that actually there was a whole one landowner had a whole plan set for fencing cattle out of the creek and doing a number of other things, but they couldn't do it because of the one piece that MDC couldn't fund. And over time, it's like, okay, we can do that. So it was even something that we don't usually do, was providing electric to make this whole plan work out. And so I found that, together we can offer, each offer a piece that makes a project, a bigger project work, be more successful. And so that's been, a much more, making this a more powerful, more, a better partnership. And again, finding we've also offered some funding for, again, some items that a landowner needed to make a project work that maybe the other partners couldn't provide.
So Rachel, how does that feel as a landowner to be in that system?
So working with Abigail, Rob, Steve, that has truly what has made this partnership be as great as it is and made as much impact as they have, is the flexibility of each one. The electric Abigail was referring to was on our place. We had to get this whole watering system in, we needed like 150 to 200 yards of electric got in to get to the wellhead. And it went through or over a person's cabin weekend retreat that they had, and they didn't want overhead power lines. Can't blame them considering how everything looked, the historic nature of it. So that was really the huge holdup to that whole system, and to where we're getting to today of putting an easement on that ground would have been that electric. Because without that electric, we couldn't have done the watering systems, and we couldn't have fenced out of Rock Branch. We couldn't have done everything that we did without that one piece of flexibility. And that is where sometimes the rigidity of the state programs has their serious faults. They cannot be flexible enough to really get what the landowner needs. They can offer partial components, but the overarching, the key to it, they cannot offer. And a lot of times the landowner couldn't afford it on top of the cost share alone. So that's really where Abigail has provided a huge resource in going after these pots of money, and Steve too, that MDC couldn't go after, Soil and Water doesn't have access to, that makes them so successful in the area.
Thank you.
Nancy, can I just say one more thing? Because,
Absolutely.
you know, this has been a priority area for me and for Ozark Land Trust for many years, and wanting to work in that watershed. But I got to say too, it's like, but we couldn't do it by ourselves. And even though our primary tool is a conservation easement, being able to do conservation practices is fantastic. But I certainly couldn't help fund this without the expertise of Rob Pulliam at MDC. So it's almost like we need them to make, to achieve some of our goals, and, as same way with Steve and doing, you need this one other piece to make the whole project and objectives work out.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and maybe people that are watching this, they're already there, but that's part of the secret of our success, and it's probably happening in other places. Yes, you can rely or find funding from state and federal agencies, funding sources, and there's a lot of good to that, but there are certain things that we just can't do, where partnering up with those private entities that have private dollars or can reach out to very generous families and foundations, quite frankly, that I can't do. They can. So that's the strength. It is like investment. How do you invest? You diversify. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're diversifying the investment across multiple spectrums. And that's part of what we can do. So I'm going to talk just briefly about what Rachel said on the electric. The Conservation Department does provide cost share to do electric. Set up a pole, do a utility meter, run electric to run the well to get you a water system. What Rachel and them had was, we're going to run this underground, has to be buried 4 feet deep, and it costs X how much per foot? Whoa, I can't do that. Abigail can. So that's the strength in this. It is the diversity of funding and partners.
Steve, do you have something to add to that? I know your organization's been really involved in the stream restoration work.
Yeah, thank you. And we started as an organization in Missouri. We really started focusing some efforts on the Merrimack River Basin right around 2010 or so. And in recognition, as we led off on this video here about how biodiverse the system is. So we had an interest, and we knew about the strong public entities who own land and manage land in the basin, but as or more importantly, all the private individuals who own and manage land and who are trying to do the right thing for their operations. So as all the landowners with the MDC and OLT were working on developing a plan for how to collaborate, led by the landowners in the basin. That's where we started working simultaneously with the agencies, academia, others, to help develop a broader conservation plan for the Merrimack River Basin, and also being invited to the table to see if there's a place where we can, as a puzzle piece, fit in and how we can provide assistance to landowners like Steve, Yokom, and Rachel for SNR, how can we be a part of the conservation puzzle for sustainable ag? And where we found a place where we could provide resources in the same way that we've discussed here, the flexibility of things that we could do that the state can't, that the feds can't, the private landowners could be challenged with, is we can bring expertise to the table and funding to the table to help the broader operations where there are some challenges. Rachel and Steve on their property had already been doing by that time a lot of the right things out there for their operations and with a conservation mindset. But sometimes, just given how rivers function and the challenges of as biodiverse and as gorgeous and as productive as these lands are in these valleys, they can also be challenging. And even though their operation had put a substantial portion, thousands of feet aside for conservation, fenced out, built up riparian zones, sometimes even those things can be challenges where years of river erosion was taking that land away and eating into already protected lands. So how can we come to the table? Part of the expertise I just have as a conservation practitioner for the past almost 20 years is working with landowners on river restoration and incorporating bioengineering and working with them with the resources they have as part of a sustainable ag operation. So that's where we started working with Rachel and Steve and their operations in conjunction with all these other partners, MDC, OLT, that are on the call here. And we were able to work within their frame, guided by how Rachel and her father wanted to manage their property, their ideas of where they wanted to implement progressive agricultural actions like warm season grasses for grazing, and use materials like wood that's located on site that had perhaps even arguably overgrown in certain areas or density in certain areas. How can we use those to stabilize that stream, even build it out a little bit and recapture that protection, slow down those things and help enhance their operations? And then that allows for, again, securing the riparian zone, getting fencing out there, providing alternative watering sources, all as part of fitting in as a piece of puzzle for this broader partnership for sustainable ag.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Steve. Let's take a minute to talk about how things spread. Rachel, you said you dipped your toe in the beginning, did some things, did a little bit more, and I understand that at this point, your farm has probably implemented more practices than any other farm in the partnership. So obviously one good experience for you led to another. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, and I'm sure all of you will have things to say about this, but it seems like there's been some, as in the slide we saw of you speaking with someone else, Rachel, just landowner to landowner, sharing what's happened, having people come to you and talk. On the other hand, Rob, you mentioned a very methodical approach with an actual conservation marketing plan. And I looked at a graph very carefully that you gave me, and I noticed that in the first 6 years, this committee completed 40 projects. And then the next year, then the conservation marketing plan was implemented. And after that, 172 projects have been done in the same amount of time. So if you all could just talk a little bit about how is this growing outward from those initial projects you did, both sort of informally and then also through your marketing plan.
Rachel, you want to
I
start?
guess I'll lead off. Yeah, I'll go with the informal part because Rob, you're the formal part. So whenever we first started, and I guess you could say our first kind of sustainable ag, the first thing we dipped our foot into, it was either a bank stabilization where they beveled the banks up at the Beckham place, or it was with Abigail with a conservation easement. I don't remember which one of those came first. They were right about the same time. I think actually the bank easement or the bank stabilization came first because that's where we made the contact with Abigail. So the bank stabilization, fencing out the huzzah, back in 07, 08. That was the first toe in the dip in the water, and we thought we were dying. We found out we did not die, and we actually liked it. It made life a lot simpler. People thought we had lost our rocker. Then we did the conservation easement with Abigail, and people really thought we lost our rocker. I mean, completely fell off of it, bonked our head, and we're never going to live again. Over time, as people have seen what we have done, we've talked with people. I talk a lot to people in work around. There's neighbors that we've talked with that are becoming more open to it through whether they have to, whether they don't. It's just a very informal conversation that we have. If we try to make it formal between us and neighbors, you quickly build up walls of saying you should do this, rather than we lead into, if they ask, this is what we like about it. This is how it makes our life easier. This is what we have gained out of it. So pitching it from that aspect. And people have seen that we haven't fallen off our rocker and bonked our head. We're getting ready to do our third easement. And I think we're probably seen as fairly progressive in the area. And it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be the first one to fall off, conk your head, as everyone thinks. So informal conversations, a lot of them have just happened out baling hay. We baled hay for some neighbors last year. And after we got done, we were all standing around talking, and they were asking us about electric fencing and what we thought of it, what kind of chargers to use, how to build it, since it is in the creek bottoms where they're thinking of putting it, what our experiences were with it. And if we could go up there and show them sometime how it worked, or how to build it, or if they could come to our place and see it. So a lot of those conversations have happened on the fly. And is very, very informal. And a lot of times we try not even to lead off with it. We let them start the conversation, so it doesn't look like we are shoving it down someone's throat, because no one wants that. So we try to let them lead the conversation or start the conversation in the informal aspect.
Thanks.
So I guess I'm up. I will say, thinking about your question, it really was a business approach. It's going to sound weird from a natural resource biologist, but I looked at it as business, and businesses are very successful when they're good, and part of that is marketing, that marketing approach. And really the aim of marketing is to make selling superfluous. If you do it right, you don't have to come up with press releases and articles and pamphlets and placemats with info on them. That's a form of promotion. You have to pay for it somehow, but you have to consider the source. Where's that information coming from? So we wanted to take a more organic approach, a more human approach, a more local approach. And that is the landowner committee. That is huge on how does this grow? It grows partially by, if you will, Shoal Creek Woodlands for Wildlife, Huzzah. We do have our own logo. It's a brand, but really our brand is we follow through with our promises. We say what we're going to do and we get them done. And that's a big thing, is following through with those promises. And that's our brand, Shoal Creek Woodlands for Wildlife. And once you get a few landowners to do things, eventually word will spread. They'll talk to their neighbors. You get a landowner committee involved, have them to be a part of the decision-making process, and take what they have to say serious and put it in your plan, then I think we're being perceived as this is the real deal. They are listening to us. They care about what we say. They're putting it in their plans. They're finding money to make that happen. And word spreads not just by participating landowners, but by members of the community that are a part of this. So it spreads through that, organically through that, through successful projects. It spreads through those landowners that you've worked with. And quite honestly, once you start working, you're putting money in that community. Well, I can't tell you how many contractors I know down there. Contractors are huge. They are a huge way to get information. Hey, have you heard about this? This is what they're doing as far as practices. And another thing, by leveraging all these dollars together to do conservation practices, it's not relying on one source of money. Pretty much everything. There's some flat rate practices that we do, like feed a fence, we'll pay you this much per foot. So there are some flat rate things. But for cost shareable items, stream bank stabilization that we've been able to do, water systems, reinforced crossings, tree planting, warm season grass stuff we've been able to do. By leveraging these dollars, we are able to offer, and this is the price, 90% cost share on your practice, and it's truth in advertising. If it's a legitimate cost for that component or that practice, we're going to pay you 90% based on the receipts, because we're able to leverage all these dollars. If you look at some of the program specifics, whether it's the state or the feds, there's always, well, there's a limit. We'll pay you whatever the percent is, but we'll max out at this amount. When we leverage our dollars, we're able to offer a true 90% cost share. So that's huge. And when that word spreads, it sells itself. To this date, besides stuff like this, we don't have any advertising. There is no advertising. There is no promotional campaign because we don't have it. If we did, I don't know how we'd keep up. So does that answer that question?
Certainly.
Nancy, I'd like to add too. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
And speaking of listening, Ozark Land Trust has learned a lot about, the requirements of a cattle operation. And again, in finding that, overlapping area where we have mutual goals, but being able to talk with or understanding the situation. At one point, I think Steve was saying, well, Abigail, I have no problem fencing, but the problem is thinking about the long-term goal here. I can't fence if I have to worry about, the cost of it coming down in a flood. It's like, okay, great. We can come up with, coming up with ideas along the way. Okay, let's try a fence repair fund. It's like, okay, so providing that little bit of, financial support on the backside was really helpful. And making them feel better in doing the fencing that they needed to do. And so we tapped into that, and that's just made it, us understand the situation that they're having to live with every day. And also, and so it's a mutual win-win again, and, finding what they need for their operation and what we need in protecting the natural resources.
And I'd like to quickly add on that very quickly, Nancy.
Okay.
In that overlap that Rachel talked about earlier, and that Rob and Abigail and Rachel have been emphasizing, there's a lot of common shared interests and a lot of diversity of where we can work together, how we work complementary with each other, and bring in different funding sources and different interests to be able to put in that reinforced stream crossing, to be able to put in alternative watering systems. And this is where the basin itself is such a driver. The partnership here, Fishers and Farmers, really speaks to why this project is an excellent example of how we can do, how there's perhaps a perceived, but maybe it's a false perception of a conflict between landowners and natural resources. This area, and this creek in particular, is amongst the best smallmouth bass fishing areas in the state of Missouri, has excellent biodiversity in general. And in fact, the type of actions we were able to take, again, as our part of the puzzle, certainly fiscally supporting reinforced crossings, fencing, but as well as being able to take, working with Rachel, working with her dad, Steve, to be able to use local wood sources and put that as part of a solution that helps them protect their property, We've talked a lot about that, but here's where that benefit of the fishers end of things comes in as well. Excellent water, you're creating habitat out there in a way that is consistent with federal agricultural practices that you can find in any NRCS handbook for stream bank stabilization, practice 580. These are the type of things we were implementing, knowing that not only are we benefiting the farmer and the operation, we're also benefiting the fishes and the resource, creating habitat diversity, and creating population resilience, frankly, over a long time by building in those habitats where large fish can be, where small fish can be, where food sources can be, as these things stabilize over time. So really wanted to underscore why Fishers and Farmers is a really good way of thinking about how we collectively, how the landowners, us as agencies and entities have approached collaborating on this project.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, it's time for us to move to small groups. I want to thank you all for this part of the program and all the things you've shared. Amy, are you ready? This will happen automatically. You will just suddenly find yourself in a group with 1 or 2 other people. And then we will bring you back after a bit. The question we want you to discuss in your small group is, what does it mean to be a bottom-up self-organized group? And how has that made a difference in this particular watershed, that there is a group like that?
When you guys get into your breakout rooms, make sure you keep your introductions really, really short and sweet. We're running close on time here. So
yeah, we ran over a little bit. So the question, kind of jot it down if you think you're going to forget it. It's in the chat right now, but it will not show up when you're in the breakout group.
So the leaders for our breakout rooms, for breakout room 1, it's Larry. Sorry if I butcher your name. Larry Levine. Breakout room 2 is Jeff Easley. 3 is Terry Spence, and 4 is Tom, except I don't know your last name, Tom. You're the only Tom on the call. So here we go.
So the question on the table is, sorry about my light isn't really great there. Make it a little better there. So what does it mean to be what's the phrase that was used? A bottom up or a bottom up organization or bottom up kind of group that partners to do something like this. Anybody have thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, I think it's great. We work with a farmer-led group and it's kind of a similar idea, but I really appreciated the fact that they really looked at like the demographics of the area to try to find folks to work with, and then using this other group that had a trusted voice, which I think was really great. Yeah,
I agree with you too. Heidi, what are your observations?
Yeah, so working in the federal government, I see a lot of times, agencies try to push something from top down, and that isn't successful. And we've seen that in all 5 states that we work. It's just, if you can have the farmers tell you and lead by example, that is so much more successful. And so that's what, we want to support in Fishers and Farmers is the bottom up, because that's where neighbors are listening to neighbors and learning, what success happens in each of, their neighbors' farms, and moving forward. We've just seen so much more success from the bottom up.
Can you hear me, Larry?
Yes, we can hear you, Abigail.
I just was going to just reiterate, if you don't know what their needs are and their issues are, you just cannot offer anything that, well, you can try. But I remember if you can still hear me, when I first met Rob 20 years ago, before I worked really closely with him, and we said, oh, we've got funding to work in this watershed. And he said, good luck. If you don't have relationships and a good relationship with the landowners, forget it. It doesn't matter how much money you want to throw at them. So, yeah, you need the funding, but if you don't have the relationship, then, pretty much forget it. Whether you want to do practices or easements or whatever.
Yeah, and I want to go somewhere besides the landowner, and of course that's critical. But the whole notion of having to create your own rules and your own kind of structure, I think is very powerful, right? I mean, I think, and Heidi
Yes.
kind of touched on it with any governmental agency, and to some extent, nonprofit agencies, but to the extent that that a set of rules is impressed upon you, it's a very different dynamic and paradigm than having to figure out what structures and what processes and what ways to communicate work well when you're starting from scratch. And I think you become almost more invested in the process because you have to do that. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I would say, it's all about the trust and living
Yes.
and working in that community, and we do in all of our projects, we look at our watershed coordinators, and if they don't live and work in those communities, the farmers aren't going to listen. And so that's one of the things we really stress in our projects is trying, you have to, and it takes years, right? It takes many years. You're not going to move into a community and get them to start listening to you, so it takes a long time, and people have to realize that, Rob has seen it, and some of the other folks that we work with, in the States, it takes a long time.
What other thoughts do people have? Abigail, how did you decide how to construct a way to, I mean, oh, did we just get booted? No.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
How did the landowner committee how'd you figure out what that would look like, act like, and be like?
I think Rob kind of hit on that, which was, really, we had already worked with a couple of landowners.
Yeah, we're losing you again, Abigail, sorry.
So it's really starting there and then growing it to folks, obviously, that have some influence and that also have an interest in this, and wanting to have a say about oh God, it's so annoying. Well, working with, knowing who figuring out which landowners have influence, who want to have an influence on the work here. When I worked in Maryland, if you can still hear me, the Farm Bureau always wanted to be at the table because they were, if the landowners, it goes on in the watershed. And so making sure that they're, I don't know, influence, you want them there. If there's issues that we need to address, we want to know what that is. So, I mean, it does take time to establish relationship and trust. And it's like, it starts from, okay, like Rachel was talking about, dipping her toe in, I was involved in that first project. I was out there on the site doing the work, and I got to know them. And it's like, oh, okay, she's, including she's willing to get dirty. And
Okay. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Is everyone back, Amy?
Yeah, for the most part, everyone should be back. Yes.
Okay. Okay. That went fast. I hope that you found something of value in that short time. Amy is going to call the leaders' names, and if you could just give us just a brief summary of a point that was made that you'd like to share that's important.
All right. So group one, Larry, go ahead.
I think the notion of everything was reiterated as far as things starting with landowners and the importance of listening for a good long time to show respect, understanding, appreciation for the work that needs to be done and to be done well and right in accordance with their needs. The notion of trust was brought up, that that being in the watershed physically, as Rob and Abigail and Steve have been so many times, helps build that relationship and that trust. And then having to create a structure from scratch, communication structure, a committee structure, when you're not dependent on a top-down structure, can really create buy-in and empowerment for something new and organic among the group who are working on the specific things within that area.
Okay, next up is Jeff.
So similar ideas. We talked about how a bottom up self-organized group is really, a group that's developed by neighbors and neighboring landowners and friends. And we talked about how that helps in developing trust and relationship building, provides a more solid foundation to the program, to the group. We also talked about how, as far as benefits go, that, having a bottom-up structure helps ensure that your program actually meets, the needs of your members, of those landowners who are in that area. And it also provides opportunities for, the other neighbors who may not be involved to kind of watch those who are actively participating, see how, their successes or failures might work out, and have discussions in the coffee shop, and you slowly build membership from there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. Terry, you're up next. You got to unmute yourself, Terry.
Sorry, I'm going to let Rob. He picked up about 4 or 5 elements of it. If Rob, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. So just a couple things. It's going to kind of echo what we've already heard, but essentially, you already have built-in trust. The trust is already built in with landowners, with neighbors, as opposed to the government employees or technical staff trying to build trust. So there's already built-in trust. And that's going to make it potentially more, people are going to be more open to the process when it's their neighbors asking them to be a part of that process. And the one I call it, I'm going to call it the Cinderella syndrome. And that is, we have a group of people and we're not trying to take our foot and shove it into a shoe and make it fit like the Cinderella story. It's the opposite. It's the opposite of that. What we did is, okay, here's our foot. This is the analogy. Here's our foot. What shoe's going to fit? And that's exactly what we've done with this quote unquote program. We're not relying on a single program. We're not coming in telling you what the program is and what the benefits are. It's all about here are the issues and needs. And now we need to find the shoe that fits our situation. And the landowners are a part of that discussion and decision. And quite frankly, the authority. And on some of them, they may actually sign the paperwork for it. So that's partly what we're looking at. All right, I'm done.
I might just add, as in being a farmer, I can truly understand how this was all put together down there, and I really appreciate the work that's been done on it.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. Last group, Tom.
Yeah, it was a repeat of what had been said earlier in the session in terms of how do you build a bottom-up organization and the little things that build trust. We have, by way of Fishers and Farmers, a Valley Stewardship Network in Southwest Wisconsin, is a couple of farmer-led watershed groups going, and we have noted it's easier when there's a common purpose, when you have people whose incomes depend on the land. Here in the Driftless area, we have a lot of recreational landowners, and in those situations, it's been harder to find those cost sharing, the cover crop stuff, the fencing, the water systems, where cost share is possible and around which you can begin to make baby steps. So that is my own personal experience. But in starting ours, again, it was land and water. We went right to them when we started a watershed council, and it was they who suggested, well, here are your 2 or 3 people that are the most respected in that area. I think you'd have a really good chance of success if you can engage some of them. And in other instances, we'd have 3 preliminary meetings and there wasn't anybody who would come forward to even make a phone call to get their neighbors involved. So we kind of had to leave that situation in favor of where we had some momentum and some recognized leaders. So it remains a challenge with recreational landowners here when in trout fishing country, where you do the cost share and those programs kind of give something for people to gel around, whereas disparate recreational landowners, they may own 200-300 acres and a mile or two of riverfront, but it's harder to find that resonant theme. But little things that build trust was the biggest deal.
That's all the groups, Nance.
Okay. As I listen to you, I'm taken back to when Fishers and Farmers started some years ago. Rob, you said in a conversation earlier that this is bigger than all of us. What you're doing is bigger than all the partners. And I hear that in everything you're saying, all of you, that the work that we all want from different perspectives takes us, makes it necessary for us to work together. It's just way bigger than we could do alone. But when we figure out how to talk to each other and we structure that enough to keep coming back to it and build the work, it works. So thank you, everybody, for your thoughts. We are ready for the Q&A, and at this time, we'd like you to keep your view in gallery view so you can see everyone. And we have very good luck with people just speaking up when they have a question and taking turns. So if you have a question, this is your time.
There were a couple questions in the chat, so I can start off there. The first one, a clarifying question for this group in a primarily forested valley landscape. What were the major and most common types of their 211 projects? I heard bank stabilization, grazing restoration, and well watering locations. Are there others?
Other practices?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Well, certainly in the riparian zones, there is stream bank stabilization, riparian corridor, tree and shrub planting, some warm season grasses sometimes, native grasses and forbs. Riparian corridor fencing and alternative watering sources. I don't think I said steering crossings, but those are the big ones kind of around there. Kind of as an aquatics guy, that's a lot of what I do. But the other ones have been, we've done some, well, I've got a list that I had just in case something like that came up. So we have woodlands, and with that, there can be like timber stand improvements, woodland thinning, which we've done. We can do prescribed fire to get the vegetative response that we want. We've done that. The warm season grass and forb establishment. Lots of fencing, ton of woodland fencing. I can't tell you how many Ozark Hills I've walked measuring fence to keep cattle out of the woodlands, and certainly some pond fencing. So pollinator habitat, we've done some of that. And so that's a lot of them as far as, yeah, well, burns, I mentioned that, prescribed burns for woodlands and grasslands. So we've done those too. So that kind of captures most of what we've done.
And I think we can have, and it'd be good if Rachel could comment on this. We want to be, as we think about it, in that, we're here for fishers and farmers. It's that combo there. So as the landowner group helps lead or leads, they don't help lead. As they lead how we do these implementations, we want to keep our ear out for what's needed out there. So that doesn't always necessarily look the same as it did 10 years ago versus what it might look 10 years from now. So we're constantly thinking about how we can collaborate and find that overlap to help landowners and fish in rivers at the same time.
There's one more question in the chat. It says, who specifically coordinates or leads all of the various grant opportunities for the Shoal Creek? Or who is the first point of contact?
Well, I'll jump in there because essentially I know a retired accountant that knows how to do spreadsheets like there's no end. So I have kept track of money and monies that are coming in, what's going out. A lot of that is tied back to grants and matching dollars. So you kind of have to have somebody that's almost like an accountant. I'm kind of almost like an accountant, but not really. But I keep track of everything, of how much money's coming in from the different grants, what's going out. Some of those, so it really goes down to who's the grant administrator. So if the committee says, yep, let's apply for this, there are some grants, there's regular cost share that, just it's always there through conservation. Saltwater District has regular cost share. But if there's grants, then it's who administers those grants. So there are some that it's Conservation Department, my name's on it, my agency's name's on it. So we're responsible for all of it from as the expression is, cradle to grave, from the project request for proposal all the way to the final reporting that needs to be done and the interim reports that need to be done. So there are some that I have, and we have done Fishers and Farmers, the Conservation Department, but the last go around, we kicked it over to Abigail. So she was the one, their organization, Ozark Land Trust, was the grant administrator. But when it came to how much money was spent, she keeps track, but I'm also keeping track of what money was spent and how, what the projects were. So that's one. And then you have Steve Harrington, who had some funding that I could not apply for, but it's significant. And I won't steal too much Steve's thunder, but one was for $500,000 and the last one was for $1.2 million to work in this geography. Very unique to Missouri. The rest of you don't get excited. You're not going to get this money, but very unique to Missouri. So I'll leave it at that. So he administers it. I give him reports. I tell him how much basically he's the money man, and I give reports. Abigail, I do projects. Here's what we did. Here's how many feet. Here's how many acres. Here's how many practices. Here's how many landowners. Here's how I leverage that money with other people's money. And then Steve reports back to the funders and go, this is what we did. So I'm done, but I hope that answers the question. I keep track of all of it, but there's different responsibilities depending on whose name's on that grant.
And Nancy, I don't know what my connection is right now, but to add to what Rob is saying, there's so many, and Rob had said earlier, we also have some private funding that we go and pursue and utilize, lots of matching and leveraging. I mean, I was able to get another grant for some of these projects, but it hinged on, we already have some funding, so building under that, leveraging other funds to make, a project complete.
Yeah, and to try to, let's see if I can do a Rob-esque type of analogy here. Maybe you can think about it as almost like a vehicle or a car. So there's alignment that happens statewide because of the recognition that, again, this basin is special and the Ozarks is a special place. And just by dint of geological history and all of those things, you have a fantastic resource here that is notable in the region for biodiversity. It brings an interest like ours in, and the Department of Conservation and Ozark Land Trust is part of what they do is looking at areas like this and how can we work with landowners, work with public entities like the Forest Service, a super important partner. Let's not forget Forest Service on here as well. And so with that recognition and things that we've done at the Nature Conservancy to align all those disparate plans from a Forest Service plan and a landowner plan, how can we align some of those things so that I can be a hub of a wheel for resources that I can bring in? And Rob and MDC, the Department of Conservation, is a hub of the wheel in planning and bringing robust resources in from the state. And Abigail and the Ozark Land Trust are a hub of their wheel to bring in private donations. We coordinate with Abigail on working with donors who have interest in the St. Louis area, even other areas of the state who care about these resources and care about sustainable agriculture. So you've got hubs of wheels, and who helps drive that? And you have Rachel, who works, as extension with the university, so bringing a ton of expertise and real skin in the game for, for property that's been in their family for a very long time. So we have these wheels, hubs of different resources that we can bring to bear, really good communication throughout, and driving that is going to be the private landowners and also, folks like the Forest Service, who do have a substantial portion of the basin under protection in the Mark Twain National Forest. So that kind of folds in how, when you ask about, well, who's a centerpiece? Good communication across all of us with different hubs to different wheels, combining into a vehicle that's driving this thing forward, really led by the landowners. I don't know if it's as good as Cinderella, but I tried on the fly there, Rob.
Good enough.
I have a question. Has anything happened in your work together, even within a project, or as you've continued and organized and just pulled things off? Has anything just crashed, or have you come to a place where you just didn't know what to do? And how did you handle that?
Yeah. There has been. It was a train wreck about to happen. Situation. I'm trying to be respectful without disclosures of names. So there was a partner. There was a request for proposal that came out for funding, and we laid out, this is what we would use the funding for. Lots of conservation practices. We'll have farm tours, share information. So we filled out the request for proposal. Landowner committee, yeah, let's apply for it. So we did, and lo and behold, we were approved. You have the money, and it was significant. It was under $100,000, but certainly north of 50. So it was quite a bit of money. And what we learned through that funding source, even though it had been approved, is that, we looked into it deeper, and we can't pay for cost share practices with landowners. We can just do plans and outreach events. And I'm like, well, I don't make that much money. There's no way I'm going to be able to, do that much planning. And the food's great down there in the Ozarks, but boy, how am I going to spend that money just on that? This is not good. So we went back to the landowner committee. It's easy to tell people something good that's happened. It takes integrity to go back and tell them, this is what we're hearing. And we told the landowner group, hey, this isn't us. This is what we're getting back. This can only be used for planning and outdoor or outreach. We shared it with the landowner committee. And one of the landowner committees, he told us, you go back and tell those people, it's not the way we do things here in Crawford County. And we did. And lo and behold, some good minds got together and figured out, there's a technical thing we can do to follow through with what we said we were going to do. And we kind of had to go through some hoops, but we did. And it got us back on track, and we got to spend the money to do what we said we were going to do. I know we can never apply for that money again to do exactly what we did the last time, but that's what happened. That's kind of a tough thing. And it was pretty early in that formation of our group. We'd already gotten some money, but it was pretty early. But that was a train wreck waiting to happen. And the landowner committee, that's so powerful. That's one of the secrets to a landowner committee. That's powerful because that landowner committee can say things and do things and get messages back to, quite frankly, government staff and administrators that I probably can't do. So that's one of the strengths of that landowner committee. They can do some things that I can't do while being gainfully employed. I know this is being recorded, but it's true. Steve, Rachel, Abigail?
Other challenges?
Yep, Rachel, I wonder if you and I could double team the challenges of just even implementing, helping secure your property so that we could do those act practices through stream bank work, and challenges with, just changes in hydrology, weather events, etc.
Rachel, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. When we first started out, I guess it was back in 17, something like 2017.
Even
Abigail,
2008, when you first initially did some low-level things to see, hey, maybe this can work on the cheap to help secure our property before we came in and tried to collaborate with you.
Okay, so yeah, go back to that time, 10, 14, 15 years ago now. We beveled the banks. We used some MDC. We went to Abigail some, and I really wasn't involved at this point. That it was Dad, and I mean, he was very gingerly sticking his toe in the water. And so they did that stuff, and pretty quickly, I mean, the creek just kept moving and moving and moving. I mean, it just moved at a rapid pace. We got to the point then, and we couldn't do anything with it. The ground was in CRP. I mean, it was kind of a joke to us in some ways of yeah, we got CRP ground right there and it's all washed away. Ha ha. I mean, this is a great use of the money.
You can look at those aerials, if you recall, 100 feet, really what landowners and we want for the resource. And then they're in the aerial. Here's a stream 2 feet, 4 feet from the fence, 100 feet gone.
Yeah. So Steve, Rob, and Abigail came to us, said, we got this, we got TNC who wants to do some stuff. We need a guinea pig, really. And we raised our hand at this point. We're like, we like being guinea pigs. And then that's really started the challenges. And I think Steve and Abigail were really working through a lot of the challenges that we faced, just getting the permitting, the archaeological reports, the digs that they had to do. I know Rob called me at one point and said, hey, was all your ground tilled at some point? I said, yeah, it was all plowed in the 50s. Just the enormous challenge, the government hurdles. And then we were having questions about the Historical Preservation Act. What would happen if they found something, heaven forbid? And would that put a total halt on things? And I mean, you get to read in that Historical Preservation Act, and it's pretty scary, some of it. So there was a lot of heart palpitations through that. We worked through it, but I know Steve and Abigail and Rob can really give more heart palpitations probably than I can.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenges of, like, if we can work with landowners like SNR with Rachel and her dad, and we can, and a key component is we'd love to do these practices, but look what happened to our CRP land, it's washed away. And how can we continue to secure our property for conservation when you have extreme weather events increasing in the area, and the challenges of being able, if we want to put in an alternative watering system, we best do something where and address some landowner needs so that watering system we put in doesn't wash away because of river processes over time. It's something we're challenged in our fishers and farmers footprint, from tiled lands, from Iowa into Minnesota, what have you. It's a big challenge of working within that corridor. And even when we were able to successfully implement these projects by working through all these difficulties through nationwide permitting, the fact that this area is protected because of its great smallmouth bass habitat, it's also protected of when you can actually do construction. We still had repairs and had to build in time where the river said in January 2020, after completing several thousand feet on not a small system of the Huza, where the river just didn't get enough colonization and the river peeled us back. We had to come in and do repairs. These are some of the challenges we needed to do and think creatively and be flexible with Rachel, their operation, and as we work with others into other operations to think, what can we do with sustainable ag that's going to benefit the environment and absolutely benefit the landowner, responding to what they need in those plans and having them drive that, having them drive us to what conservation can look like. And then what is it going to be in the future? How do we make sure that we don't undermine a project or fund a project, be ready for those repairs, be ready to be agile and where we can find funding for the next type of thing. Those are some of the challenges, even on implementation, outside of the structural things Rob talked about, even boots on the ground construction, where it can be tricky.
Thanks, Steve. Other questions, anyone? Okay, well, I think it's about time to wind up. Heidi, I know you always have you're like an encyclopedia of resources. And I suspect you've been putting things in the chat. Do you have anything you want to add about resources or places people can access things they need?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, this has been an awesome webinar today. Thank you so much. It's great to see all the faces and the names. I know in the past, I've worked with some of you and it's been over the phone or through email. So it's really great to see the faces today. And sorry, it can't be in person, but this has been really wonderful. If you go to our website, fishersandfarmers.org, you can find some of our past projects that we've funded. And we, Fishers and Farmers, fund projects every year. If you think you might have a project that we would be interested in working with you, feel free to either email me or call me and I'll put my contact in the chat. I would love to talk with you about your work and how Fishers and Farmers can hopefully help you, whether that's dirt moving projects or not. We also support farmer-led councils or farmer committees, depending on what state you're from and what you call your farmer group. But I would love to talk with all of you in the future, and this has been wonderful. Thank you for joining us today.
So thank you all. Keep coming back when you get stuck. Remember, these are your people, and you can call, you can contact us. We just encourage you to network and look for creative ways to get stuff done. So thank you, Abigail and Rachel and Steve and Rob. We really appreciate your time and all your stories and your expertise.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.